So good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's session of the Deloitte Banking Risk and Regulatory Academy. This is its sixth edition. We are pleased to have you with us today as we continue our exploration of the key risk, regulatory and transformation topics shaping the banking industry and banking sector. Each session combines regulatory perspective with real-world experience, offering clear takeaways you can apply within your organization. We encourage you to actively participate. Before we dive in, let me give you a very quick tour of how you get the most out of today's session. First of all, keep your questions coming, drop them straight into the Q&A box anytime. We block some time at the end to go through as many as we can. Some of them will be able to respond after the session. Second, you'll see live polls popping up on your screen throughout the session. We're going to have 3 questions today. Just jump in, click your choice, and let's see what the room thinks. They're fully anonymous, so feel free to be also bold here. Also, don't be shy in the chat. Say hello, share reactions, or flag any technical issues. Our team is watching in the whole time. Yes, we are recording this webinar as well, so you'll be able to rewatch it or share it with your colleagues afterwards. So, right, let's start. The BCBS 239 and RDARR is basically a topic that is more relevant than ever because the regulatory landscape is entering also in the new phase of data-driven supervision. BCBS 239 and RDARR are no longer limited to risk data only. Supervisors now expect enterprise-wide consistencies, transparency, and strong governance across all critical reports and metrics. And today's session is about understanding this shift and preparing for the heightened expectations already visible in the current environments. We have a blend of the 3 senior professionals actually today with us. Stefan, Ruhland, maybe you'd like to present yourself very briefly.
Hello, good morning from my side. Stefan, I'm a partner based out of Frankfurt. My team and I support clients in all matters of data management, but particularly where data meets risk and regulation. So we are doing very many BCBS 239 implementation and remediation projects, not only in Germany, but all across Europe. And I'm very happy to be here today. Fabio, if you want to continue.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thanks, Stefan. I'm Fabio Crepaldi. I'm a partner from Deloitte, Italy. I've been working over the last 25 years in the field of prudential regulation and risk governance. Let's say that I had to we focus very much on the risk data and aggregation ECB guidelines, helping a number of clients across Italy and Europe defining and implementing their RDARR framework. I also lead the technical expert group on risk data aggregation of the CRO group, which is, let's say, a meeting of the 12 biggest European banks that have a frequent relationship and interaction with the ECB to discuss about the status of implementation and major issues we see on the market. Please, Damir.
Thank you, Fabio. My name is, good morning, colleagues. Once again, my name is Damir Vukotić. I'm a partner in Central Europe. Central Europe is a construct of 19 countries. I've been leading the offering called Risk Regulatory offering in a southern cluster of the Central Europe, being directly responsible for 9 countries, being in the banking advisory, my 5th year, but also spending 15 years in a banking, or actually starting my career in the data governance field back in the days. So I think we can move on. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Yeah. And before we dive into the deep dives, some general overview. why is BCBS 239 or RDARR such an important topic currently? And if we go to the next slide, most of you will most probably know BCBS 239 was an outcome of the financial market crisis in 2008. Everyone said, okay, banks and boards don't have the right numbers, the right reports to make educated decisions in times of stress and crisis. But more importantly, also supervisors didn't trust the numbers. So as a result, there was lots of discussions. How can we improve on data in banks? How to make the IT landscape and reporting more robust? And in 2013, BCBS 239 came into effect. And then it was first for GSIB, so the globally too big to fail banks, and then it trickled down into locally or domestically systemically important banks. And by I think 2017, 2018, almost everyone said, yeah, that's done and dusted. We did what the regulator asked for, but not so fast. And starting from 2018, 2019, ECB started voicing complaints. First, quite politely in terms of it would be best practice if you do more here and there, but then increasing pressure. And what was the result? Banks didn't really react to it. And this led us, what we see on the next slide, ECB being very clear about we're dissatisfied, we do not see enough progress. There's still data quality issues, fragmented IT landscape, limited ambitions, insufficient staffing, all those things in no uncertain terms by Andrea Enria, who was back then the chair of ECB banking supervision. And they started a so-called campaign of on-site inspections and horizontal exercise inspections for each and every ECB supervised banks. And while they started, I think almost 4 years ago, these campaigns is still ongoing. There's still, we see clients in various jurisdictions where inspections have just been announced or are kicking off, and they get ever tougher. And what is the result we see on the next slide? What you see here is a kind of heat map, how the findings are scattered across the various aspects of RDARR. And when they announced the campaign and started inspections, everyone said, yeah, it's about BCBS or risk data aggregation. So there will be lots of findings related to data quality, data architecture, been there, done that. What caught many banks on the wrong foot is ECB's clear focus on governance, on management body, on board level oversight, on compliance monitoring, on 3 lines of defense. So this is where we see the highest density of F4 findings. And this to understand, when we have bilateral meetings with ECB, these are fairly technical in nature. It's lots about technicalities and how to interpret. But at certain points, ECB people get quite emotional in terms of what do we need to do for banks to do more? What do we need to do for C-level executives to take us seriously? And this is the reaction we see in the market. This is where they hit hardest. This is how they like to get the attention of the CFO, the CRO, the CIO, and tell them in very clear words, you need to do more. And while data quality and architecture, there are lots of findings, these market observations drive also the focus topics we have selected for today. And maybe to say also not to be too this, not to end this slide on a positive note. You see that the green dots on the lower right-hand side, the reports as such. This is where ECB basically says, yes, you have the right reports, the right distribution list, frequency, content, that's all good. Where they now zero in is how does the data get into the report and who is responsible for the data. And this brings us to the first focus topic, and I will hand over to Fabio.
Thanks, Stefan. So today, basically, the idea is that we will give you an overview of what we see on the marks in terms of governance, roles and responsibilities with a specific focus on roles and responsibilities of the management bodies and of the internal control functions. In a nutshell, setting up and executing a proper framework to address ECB expectation on data aggregation reporting requires a number of different actors and stakeholders to be involved and having an active role. So within this slide, we try to wrap up the main, let's say, players that need to be involved in the risk data aggregation framework setup and execution. First and foremost, the management bodies. We know that the ECB guide clearly asked for a more active role and involvement of the management body. This is, as per what Stefan was saying, also the outcome of a long track where the ECB and regulators have been asked for a more active role of management bodies that in the past were kind of passive, just being informed about the existence of those programs, but not having a clear role in addressing and ensuring its full and correct implementation. So lots of pressure, lots of focus on this. Then we have specific roles for the data governance department, who is in charge of the design of the overall framework of the, let's say, data governance safeguards, the methodologies that the banks need to use to address data quality, data lineage, IT capabilities, data granularity, whatever. So I would say the data governance is the kind of, let's say, the one who is in charge of designing the overall framework and making sure it is consistently implemented across the entire banking groups, across different legal entities, across different geos, across different business. The IT department, they also have a pivotal role. This is something that has gained much relevance over the last year, particularly in Europe, where the ECB really raised the bar expectation on what the IT architecture need to ensure in terms of flexibility, granularity, seamless treatment of data. So the idea is that, as per what we said, fragmented IT landscape has been identified by regulator as one of the key weaknesses that need to be addressed, and this often requires major IT programs to, let's say, address core deficiencies of the IT landscape. Then there's obviously a key role of business departments. Once again, the ECB guide underlines the relevance of data owners. Data owners are those in charge of single data, meaning that they are responsible to identify critical data, to make sure they are properly treated, that sound data quality controls are implemented across the end-to-end data life. In a nutshell, they are the ultimate responsible of single data correctness and adequacy. So they have a pivotal role, and the data owners obviously are distributed across different departments: the chief risk officer, the chief financial officer, the chief lending officer. They basically are the guys that use those data, and they need to make sure they are sound and adequate. And then we have the internal control function, whose main job is to make sure that everything is properly working. The ECB guide particularly set specific responsibility on the internal control function, asking an independent validation of the entire framework, governance, tools, scope, outcomes. So these require clear and specific focus from banks. I would move on to the management bodies. Yeah, in this slide, we try to wrap up what we see on the market in terms of what management bodies are doing. We said that we observe a high number of findings when it comes to management body roles and responsibilities, with 60%, so more than half of the sample of inspected banks having reported relevant findings, F3, F4, so high severity findings in this field. We see that market practices are evolving. More and more banks are addressing specific responsibilities and charging the management body of specific roles that, generally speaking, are more about the, let's say, high-level design and governance of the framework. The ECB, within its guide, clearly stated that the management bodies can actually delegate some of their members or some senior manager to look after the proper execution of the framework. So our point of view is that the board of directors should have a key role in approving the RDARR program and scope of work, in approving and somehow addressing the key capabilities, those which are more relevant, like major project to address IT deficiencies, tooling and approaches to address data quality management, key quality indicator reporting, data lineage tooling. So those kind of high-level decisions that also require major investment should be somehow overseen and also approved by the board of directors. And then obviously the board of directors can choose to delegate the day-to-day execution and implementation to their delegated management body or senior manager, but they still need to have a periodic and detailed update on the program status, where we are compared to the plan, what are the main issues, what are the main shortcomings, and how we are addressing those. And also they need to be aware of the ongoing dialogue with JSTs and regulators. Management body delegates on their side should clearly address the program on a day-to-day basis and should ensure that the structure have the required commitment. We think a very good market practice is actually setting specific goals in delegated senior managers, MBOs, to somehow make sure that the right priority is being given to the execution of the program. We then have one slide on what we see on the market. We don't have much time today, so I'll be very quick. I would say that, generally speaking, most of banks have chosen to delegate, the boards of most banks decided to delegate to their management body members or senior managers the actual execution. And we see that more frequently the delegates are chosen within the CRO, the Chief Risk Officer, which is by far the more, how can I say, appointed, and then within the CIO and the CFO members. So I would say that we see good evolution in terms of market practices now compared to a couple of years ago. I think we have much more clear understanding of what the ECB expectations are, and market players are actually somehow reaching compliance with expectation, at least in terms of roles and responsibilities of the management bodies. I would then move on to the internal validation department or internal validation. Actually, this is one of the main challenges that banks are also facing. The ECB guide actually asks for a complete end-to-end internal independent validation of the RDARR framework, which obviously requires the definition and setup of an independent unit who is in charge of those kind of this review. And we see that there are not fully homogeneous practice in terms of roles, responsibilities, and scope of the internal validation department. You can see in this slide what are the more common tasks and some tasks that are not always performed by all the banks that we assessed. I would say that we would expect and we would suggest of the items from A to I to be covered by the independent validation. In terms of the main challenges that we see, we think that sourcing the right skill sets and capabilities is the key challenge that internal validation need to address. I would say that we have one slide that will focus on where the internal validation is set. But I would say that at the moment, the market, also because, the Basel II framework requires an internal validation for models, banks, at least SSM banks, already have internal validation department whose main focus is on risk models and risk practices. So most of the internal validation are set within the chief risk officer. We'll have a slide about this. And they, generally speaking, have good capabilities when it comes to, to the data owners' roles, knowing the data, knowing the data flows, the scope of data, their meaning, and whatsoever. What they lack at the moment is, generally speaking, data governance capabilities and IT and data architecture capabilities. So this is where probably banks need to invest more and to define a proper target operating model to make sure they have all the required skill sets and capabilities. And obviously, banks need to define a proper framework where roles and responsibilities of different control functions actually are working in synergy without overlaps across different units. I would quickly go through the next slide where we see that most banks has actually set their internal validation within the CRO department, as per what we said. And then we also see there are different operating models that are being defined and adopted by banks to address internal validation needs. I would say that the more frequent approach is that of an accentrated unit, one single unit, generally speaking, within the chief risk officer, who is in charge of the entire independent validation of risk data aggregation frameworks. But more complex and bigger banks also tend to have more complex framework where different units with different competencies across CRO, CFO, Chief Lending Officer, IT departments are responsible of separate pieces that are then put together to make sure everything is somehow brought under the same final reporting. And this can be done either with a distributed approach where different units are responsible of different validation and then everything is put together, or with a federated approach when there is one single unit responsible of independent validation that somehow leverage different units that are already available across the bank. I would say, conscious of time, I would move on. Obviously, we'll leave the slide for you to review. And if you have any question, we can.
Fabio, I
Please.
see in the chat some very interesting questions related to the topic. So I'm not sure if all of them have been answered, but let's have a quick look. Who should be accountable for BCBS compliance, CRO, CFO? I think we had this benchmark slide from the banks. Rich, I hope it's answered. Then another question Fabio may want to answer. Grateful if you could add any regulatory feedback for supervisory board members, chair of audit and risk. So maybe the role of the supervisory board. And do you want to comment on this quickly?
Yeah, actually, I would say that supervisory reporting are definitely to be included within the framework. This is clearly stated by the guide.
No, it's not supervisory reporting. It's about the supervisory board, the non-executive
The
directors.
supervisory board. Okay, sorry. Yeah, actually, this is quite an articulated and complex topic, but I would say that the regulator clearly asked for specific roles and responsibility also on the supervisory board. Generally speaking, the supervisory board should be responsible of higher level tasks according to their own, how can I say, profile, which is mostly about making sure a proper framework is being set up and ensuring it is compliant with the bank's need and regulatory expectation, while the management board should be more in charge of the proper execution. We have addressed this topic with a number of clients. I would say there is no one fit for all solution. Specific roles and responsibilities in charge of the supervisory board should be consistent with their internal, how can I say, culture and roles and responsibilities of the supervisory bank. But they clearly need to have a specific and clear role on this.
The last question, should internal validation, should they issue recommendations and act as an auditor, or should actively work on RDARR implementation? I think it's crystal clear. They will write their validation findings, and
Yeah.
they should better not touch implementation or
Yeah,
you get another segregation of duties finding.
Indeed, no, they need to be independent. So what we see is that they are somehow involved during the framework design, but more to be aware of what's going on. But they do not need to get involved in decision. Otherwise, they would not be independent. Don't know if there are any other questions.
There seemed to be one more question for non-systematic banks. Is there an expectation to still assess application of the RDARR, albeit to a lesser extent?
Okay, this is somehow left to the single national competent authorities. Obviously, the regulation is there for everyone to be applied for all, let's say, SSM and not SSM banks. So what we see on single markets is that NCAs are issuing some regulators' expectation on this, and they're somehow kicking off the dialogue with their own less significant institution. For example, in Italy, we know a number of banks have been somehow assessed and challenged on this, but obviously, the greatest focus of regulators at the moment is on SSM banks.
Yeah, but we see in a handful of jurisdictions that the national competent authorities let this they let it slowly trickle into the smaller banks. So maybe there is no legal foundation for this, but they also apply the standards maybe to a lesser extent, but nonetheless also to smaller banks, and that's an area of ongoing discussion, I'd say.
Yeah, there is a proportionality principle, but I would say the expectations are there.
Fabio,
Okay, cool.
I see that the question in the chat is being heated up. So my recommendation is take one more question and then we move on. I mean, like a question is when it comes to internal validation structures, is it more common that a chief information officer sets up the standard for data governance, ownership, and data lineage principles, whereas chief risk officer are more in charge of managing the system properly as a second line of defense function?
I would say that depends on the specific bank's roles and responsibility. But once again, internal validation, if we are talking about internal validation, should be independent. If we are talking about other roles of the chief risk officer, I would say that when it comes to data governance and data management, we see most banks have defined specific roles and responsibilities within the CIO or the Chief Data Governance Officer. Some banks have a chief in charge of data governance, the CDO.
I think
While the chief, just to close, while the chief risk officer, generally speaking, is more in charge of specific data key risk indicator in the risk management area. But the overall IT and data governance framework is generally speaking outside the CRO scope of work.
I think we have only half an hour left, two topics. I think regarding the questions, if we cannot answer them easily, yes or no, we'll take them and answer them afterwards if this makes sense, because I think at this pace we need to speed up a bit, and we'll share the materials and we'll make sure that all questions get answered. But we also don't want to not showing you the topics we have here today, if this makes sense.
Absolutely.
All right, then we would like to close the first section on let's say roles and responsibilities with the poll to somehow engage a bit the audience and double check with you what the key priorities and the key challenges you see on the market. So the question is, what are the main challenges to address RDARR governance and effective implementation? Quite a wide question. The possible responses are defining roles and responsibilities, what we've been discussing so far, onboarding adequate skills and competencies, allocating sufficient resources. So here we're talking also about, let's say, money that need to be put on those programs, and then meeting expected tight timelines. We did not mention this, but all banks have been asked to come up with the implementation plan, which are, let's say, challenging in terms of deadlines. You should be able to vote. We really encourage you to cast your vote. We'd like to get your view on this topic. Obviously, all of them are relevant challenges, at least as per what we see on the market. But I would say that, at least from my perspective, probably, at least in terms of roles and responsibilities and skill and competencies, the idea are more clear than they used to be a couple of years ago. So I think at the moment the main challenges are on let's say effective execution implementation. So having the right people and the right resources in the right places at the right time. But I'd like to see what your answers are. So you are partially in line with my expectation. I see that a number of banks still answers that defining clear roles and responsibilities is a major challenge. So we probably also still need to work a bit on this. But then I see that onboarding adequate skills and competencies and allocating sufficient resources are still major items, while meeting expected timelines seems to be less of a challenge. This I would have expected to be more a kind of a pain. Anyway, thanks everyone for the attention and for your answers. We'll let you have the slides and follow up where we were not able to get today. I think we now can move on to the following section on the scope of application. Damir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fabio. So I will briefly walk you through the scope of application part of the presentation, which focuses on how expectations also from the supervisors are evolving, but also what we see at the market at the moment. We are seeing across many significant institutions that the implementation of the BCBS 239 is still largely concentrated on the risk data domain. However, supervisory authorities have clearly shifted their perspective. So not only the expectation for the banks is on the risk data, but also to progressively expand beyond into the additional management areas. One of the areas that is particularly under the scrutiny is the consistency between the risk and accounting data, following directly from the Article 36 of the BCBS 239 principles, which stresses the need for the alignment across these data domains. At the same time, we also observe that the regulators increasingly anticipate that the BCBS 239 will extend to regulatory data and other control functions in the near future. So the implications here, what we observe is also very clear. Institutions need to prepare for the much broader and more integrated application of the BCBS 239, reflecting on these rising expectations. What does this mean when we look into the more on the actionable points? Is that the gradual expansion of the BCBS 239 naturally poses also the challenges for the financial institutions, especially those that have built their frameworks with a more pragmatically defined scope in mind from the very beginning. And then, as the scope widens, additional data fields or the data flows becomes relevant and must be reflected in the data lineage, which we will also speak very in short. And this is expected both from the perspective of the transparency and the traceability. Second, in order to ensure the data quality in this more complex environment, institutions also need to define and embed appropriate data quality checks, integrating these into their data quality issue management frameworks or the processes, and aligning those with the data quality reporting accordingly as well. So beyond data, the shift in scopes also requires the broader changes. Everything from process documentation to the call it functional guidelines, so the departmental guidelines, to the overarching frameworks that govern the risk and reporting processes as such. So taken together, I think that the key message, what we see is that BCBS 239 is no longer about pragmatically defined risk data effort only, or the dominantly. It is moving toward more holistic enterprise-level standards, and that requires institutions to evolve their structures, processes, but also systems of controls accordingly. If we move to the next slide, Margarita, please. We look also at the current state and the future intention as well, building on the previous slide. This slide shows how the banks have actually applied the standard so far and where they plan to go next. And what you see here on the left-hand side is a survey that we conducted in 2024 across risk, financial, and regulatory reporting mostly, and it clearly shows that most banks initially limited BCBS 239 implementation primarily to the internal risk reports, while pushing, call it many other report types into the future scope. And that's one of the outcome of our exercise back then. I mean, for example, risk appetite indicators or the key risk indicators as well, or the matrices are already mostly included today, while areas like Pillar 3 disclosures or the field rep, core rep, or the stress testing submissions, are more back then planned for the future rather than already being implemented. And that gap between the current and the future scope directly reflects what we discussed also earlier. Many institutions sort of pragmatically or intentionally narrow down the original implementation efforts simply due to the scale of complexity of the BCBS 239. However, over time, this narrowing has also proved sort of a misaligned with the supervisory expectations. And the very, very important comment here is that the banks will actually need to invest further in the further alignment with the RDARR guide, incorporating what initially was planned as a future state of some of the elements of the scope of application of the RDARR into their remediation programs or the extension of their existing projects. So, so when I look at the previous two slides, I think that the really important message here is that, I think, start was sort of a pragmatic. I mean, like we looked at the more narrowly defined scope, and the expectation are increasing into more of the enterprise-wide application, and the gap between those two realities is driving a significant expansion, remediation, but also the supervisory pressure across the industry. If we move to the next slide, thank you. The last slide actually on the scope of application is the importance of defining the scope of application properly and involving the management into the process as well. I mean, this slide illustrates how the BCBS 239 applies to specific reports and key metrics used for bank steering and regulatory oversight. We also have a real a live example from one of our clients here that has the key risk committees and a key risk report defined, but also regulatory reports and definition of those, but also the scheduling aspect in scope of the RDARR. And the central message here is that BCBS 239 does not apply only to risk data in a generic sense. I mean, it applies to all key reports and metrics that the board relies on for decision making and managing the bank. On the left-hand side, you'll see examples on the key risk committees, reports that they use, such as financial risk update, recovery plan monitoring, ALCO, liquidity coverage report, non-financial risk dashboards. These are considered from this bank perspective as material report. There was a process in place where the bank has decided that these are significant material reports because they directly influence strategic decisions, risk appetite monitoring, and the day-to-day management. And then there are a number of the regulatory reports, as we mentioned, I mean, including COREP or the FINREP or the large exposures or the liquidity metrics, the MREL. Many of these regulatory reports are also now considered within the scope as well. Not necessarily always in their entirety, but this depends on the institution to the institution and the roadmap that they lay down here as well. I think one of the important aspects here is that the board must be able to identify, measure, and manage data quality risks and set guidelines for how data is governed across both financial and risk-related domains. And this includes also defining which reports are material and what metrics they rely on and how these metrics are governed, tested, and validated. We've also discussed about the validation in previous slides. So I think overall, if I'd like to summarize, the previous slides, I think regulators expect BCBS to apply far more broadly than before. The regulatory scrutiny will not get less. I mean, it will get higher. And, as a result, I think the remediation programs or the roadmaps need to consider also all key reports and metrics used to steer the bank. Whether risk, financial, or regulatory, the expectation is to meet the BCBS 239 standards in terms of the accuracy, completeness, timeliness, and overall governance. So we also have here planned a poll, a question as well. I mean, like the question that we planned is, and before we continue, we'd like to also get a quick sense of where your institutions currently stand in terms of the BCBS 239 implementation. So the question is, how broad is the current scope of BCBS 239 in your institution? So it's a single option choice here, where we have a couple of possibilities, the options. First, focusing only on the risk data, call it risk reporting, including risk models or the material risk models, those that are used for the risk measurements or the key risk indicators. Then the risk plus financial reporting. We've also included the risk plus financial reporting, including regulatory reporting as an option here as well. Enterprise-wide, more like a management data included, also for the internal purposes as well. But also we put one of the options as a not sure, so call it a scope of application is still under the discussion. So please feel free to take your time and vote for one of these options.
And for sure, it should be a careful decision. But if you can take them quickly, I have a chance to walk you through the third topic today, data lineage, which is also a great concern to many banks. Yeah. And asking my colleague Marita, do we have a hard stop at 10 or could we extend by a few minutes?
I would prefer to make it at 10.
Okay, then I just have to speak faster, can't be helped.
So let's see the result. Okay, so interesting outcome. So 45% to the large extent cover the risk data, financial reporting and regulatory reporting, still less than 50%. Then 26% actually not sure. Also an interesting outcome because defining the scope of application is actually the first step into the data governance as well. But also some other results, very interesting risk data, risk reporting at a 13% and the risk and financial reporting at a 10%. Somehow indicate that the banks already have taken steps to include a broader scope of applications and still to make sure that the compliance is in place. With this, we are also closing the second session, discussing the scope of application and handing over to Stefan to lead us through the data lineage topic.
Then, as already mentioned, I have just to talk faster. So what you see here, data lineage, the big data lineage beast, and the extract from the ECB guide, complete and up-to-date data lineages on attribute levels, starting from data capture, including ETL, for all the critical data elements in scope of application. That's quite a mouthful. And I haven't met a single bank in Europe that would fully live up to this expectation. Every bank is struggling. How can we make this work? And ECB is still insisting on it. They say you need to do more. And this is what we would then see on the next slide. We collected the findings from roughly more than a dozen on-site inspections. In total, 29 findings addressing lineage, 80 separate shortcomings from banks all over Europe, from Finland to Spain, from Ireland to Greece. CE maybe not so well represented, but I hope this is going to change after the webinar and more of you will join in our benchmarking exercises. But the answer is pretty clear. What ECB wants to see end-to-end lineage. They want to see controls and ownership for lineage. They also say granularity. You need to go to attribute level. Doing it on system level or object level isn't good enough. And even if you manage to do this, they say, yeah, you have the systems, but what about end-user computing? It also needs to be included in the lineage. And by the way, it's not complete in any way, shape, or form. It's not sufficiently automated. It's not linked to a business glossary. So this is where ECB is headed. This is what we see continuously in on-site inspections all across Europe. And banks are still, but how should we do this? That's even if I have all the budget in the world, it would take ages. I don't have the resources. And even if money is not a topic, as soon as I publish it, it will be outdated. Where's the business value in it? These are the questions being asked in the industry. And if we go to the next slide, At our last EMEA roundtable, we asked the banks, where do you expect more pragmatic approaches, or let's say, where do you expect more leniency from ECB, willing to agree to solutions that live rather up to the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law? And it's also clear. It's end-to-end, it's granularity leading by far. And when we ask banks, where would you want to see benefits from data lineage? Do you really, the tools you're using, provide you any benefits when it comes to investing data quality issues? Yeah, moderately. Audit and reporting validation, somehow. But other topics like meeting ad hoc or identifying redundancies, rarely. System decommissioning, not there yet. So it's clearly indicating most of the effort spent on lineage is of limited business value, and this needs to change. The industry, in accordance with ECB, needs to find more pragmatic approaches to data lineage, and this is the ongoing discussion. As Fabio mentioned, the industry bodies we are privileged to host, be that from the Zero Group, be that the CFO network, they're all constantly talking to ECB. How can we make this work? And I would like to go to the next slide already. This is what we try to set out, some of best practices we see to cut back on the effort, set the right scope for your lineage. As Damir already mentioned, if you put very many reports and metrics into scope without considering it carefully, then you will have to do an awful lot of lineage. So scoping is maybe the biggest lever to reduce the efforts for lineage. You can't cut back so much. If you want to cut back on material RAS metrics, doesn't help. Cautious definition of a CDE. What does critical really mean? What is which subset of your data estate can be considered critical? What really moves the needle for the resulting key risk indicator? How much does a balance, a maturity date, and an industry code impact RWA or the likes? These are things you need to think on, and the best banks we support. What really you need to understand, okay, what does ECB wants to achieve? Letter versus the spirit of the law. While the text in the ECB guide is pretty clear, in the feedback statement to the ECB guide, ECB lays out what they want lineage to achieve, having the ability to locate data quality issues quickly, making sure that you have the right controls in place. We are of the conviction that this can be achieved by lesser means, but it is still an ongoing discussion in the industry. And here I want to use this as maybe how would AI data mining Palantir outcome be somehow sufficient for data lineage? I haven't seen, working with some of the largest banks in Europe or globally, that really also invest in Palantir and very sophisticated AI solutions, not there yet. Not in a form that would satisfy regulatory needs. There are big and inflated promises from various tool vendors and AI companies, but so far they have more overpromised and underdelivered. May change. We see rapid progress, and there is some benefit to be had from using some AI capabilities in data governance and metadata tools, but there is no press a button solution out there. If you can cut back 50, 60, 70% of the manual efforts, you're already pretty good. This is maybe what you can expect nowadays, but not purchase a tool, press a button, and you're done. It's not going to happen this year and maybe not next year. I think we're moving there, but not at the pace necessary to avoid questions from ECB. And do you do lineage also within EUCs? We try to avoid it. Let me answer it in a more broader sense. How far do I need to look into a system or an application? I'm personally of the conviction you need to manage input and output interfaces, and you need to understand how inputs and outputs are connected. You don't need to reverse engineer every system, but that's my personal interpretation to be discussed. If we move to to the next slide, conscious that we have only 5 minutes left, and apologies for cutting this short. I would love to discuss this endlessly. Please stay tuned. In the next few weeks, there will be our new, brand new data lineage publication where we advocate for pragmatic approaches, pragmatism over perfection, where I say, what is my risk appetite? Low risk appetite approach, yeah, I'll do everything as a regulator asks. High risk, yeah, I'll do what I like and don't care much about the regulator, also not sustainable. We want to lay out how could a medium risk approach look like that is pragmatic, but nonetheless can meet the expectation of ECB. So I want to use this just as a sneak peek, and please stay tuned and take a look at the white paper as soon as out. Then that's for sure an interesting discussion to be continued. Getting us to the end of lineage, and apologies for being that brief, but as Margarita told us, we need to close down on time. Also here we have a question, and then I would kindly ask to bring up the list of topics to say what do you see as the biggest challenge with respect to data lineage? And it's not a single choice. You can rank them because for some of you, yeah, all of them are somehow important. All of them could constitute a challenge. So here you can set it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is for you the most challenging? Is it end to end? And what does end to end actually mean? Do we need to consider our mobile sales app that even sits before the core banking system? And I work with clients that do point of sales financing. Does data lineage really start in the retail, in the electronics chain, where you can buy a new flat screen TV in 12 installments? It's also granularity. What is the use of having all the interfaces duplicated in our data lineage solution? Do we really need to have hundreds of thousands of database columns to do lineage? Completeness. It's the same. Which portion of my data estate do I need to bring under lineage? And also address the maintenance, up to date. It's not do it once and it's done. And expect it to be up to date. And as soon as you publish it, in some pocket of your data estate, things are changing. A new data model being deployed, an interface changes, a new system introduced, and your lineage is no longer up to date. Or is it more about controls? Do you have maybe lineage documented, but not sufficient data quality checks along the report production process along the lineage? So all of these could be challenges, but maybe one or the other is for you more pressing or more prominent. So we would love to hear what you see as the biggest challenge and what is maybe for you less of a concern.
Stefan, there are a couple of questions also.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we try to answer while Margarita is complying. So the interesting one, how to deal with data lineage in scenarios where closed source black box system like Walter's Clavers etc.
Yeah, I think, and again, that's my personal take and how I advise clients. If this is a market solution that you have purchased that follows a software development process where you have proper documentation, testing, and system integration, I think having input and output interfaces is good enough. You don't need to reverse engineer externally purchased solutions. That cannot be the ask that goes beyond what lineage can do. However, what we also see that lots of solution software vendors are very reluctant to disclose information or often charge you in addition to say we can provide you lineage for our solution, but there's an additional license for that. So here, I think it's also a task. It doesn't make sense for each and every bank to have this discussion in separation. Here we would also expect, like we had it for rating providers and the like, clear guidance from the supervisor, what solution providers are supposed to disclose and what is their part in the game. But so far, it's more or less each and every bank discussing this in isolation with solution providers, with market data providers, and so on. That is not satisfying. And here, I must say, unfortunately, also industry bodies like European Banking Federation haven't picked up the topic to drive this to the solution providers and ECB. Any other question we can squeeze in?
Yeah, would AI data mining, like example Palantir, be somehow sufficient for data lineage?
I try to answer it in between, if you may have noticed, and I think not there yet. Many banks, let's say, explore and experiment with various solutions. And there are lots of promises and often broken promises out there, inflated expectations from vendors. I haven't, the press the button solution is not there yet, I'm afraid. Still some work that needs to be done.
Last question, do you do lineage also with the end user computing?
And also here, I tried to answer it in between, and good to see that Aris is on the call. Lineage within EUC, I would limit it to inputs and outputs. And this applies to actually not only EUCs, but systems. If you say you have the input interface, the output interface, and I know how inputs and outputs are connected, I do not need to reverse engineer all the business logic that is kept within the system.
Very good. I think we are running out of time. So thank you very much for the very interesting, hopefully, discussions, for your time. Very much appreciated. Fabio, Stefan, Margarita, thank you for the organization. We had more than 300 participants, which actually shows that there is a high interest of the topic. I wish you really a great rest of the day and the week, and we keep in touch with many of you. In case you have any questions or would like to discuss anything bilaterally, you can reach to any one of us, Fabio, Stefan, or myself, and we'd be happy to engage and even have a workshop with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.